Hey, Cinemaholics listeners and friends, it's your old pal John Negroni, and I'm here to tell you about something super incredibly important. Take it away, Will Ashton.
Huh? Take what away?
Well, put down those chips. We're doing the podcast. You're supposed to tell them about our upcoming Top 10 Movies of 2020 episode and how the listeners can easily participate.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's a thing.
Anyway, we here at Cinemaholics can't wait to hear what you, the listeners, have picked as your favorite movies over the last year. Abby Olchesi, how can the listeners weigh in on... Abby? Are you listening?
Oh, sorry, no, not at all. Were you talking about something important?
Well, yeah, I'm trying to explain how the listeners can leave us a voicemail on the Swell app. Available on iOS and Android and... Will, are you popping popcorn right now?
Yep, want some?
Yes, please.
Guys, you are making this so hard to... Will, turn that off. I'm trying to do the podcast thing.
Jeez, don't have a first cow.
Man, I love this part. Turn up the volume, Will.
If you two don't cut it out, the listeners will never find out how they can leave us a recorded message on the Swell app, telling us why their number one film of 2020 impacted them and resonated, despite it being such a terrible year otherwise. And is that white cheddar popcorn seasoning?
Sure is, buddy.
Here, have a seat, John. We can talk about your boring podcast thing once we get to the commercials.
Welcome once again to Cinemaholics. From the Bay Area, I am John Negroni, editor-in-chief of Cinemaholics. From Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he is a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend, and he also reviews films for cinemahawks.com. It's Will Ashton.
Hi, John.
From Kansas City, she's the film editor for The Pitch, with bylines at Slashfilm, Crooked Marquee, RogerEbert.com, and Your Hearts. It's Abby Olchesi.
Hello.
You can find more episodes of our show, including our full archive, on cinemaholics.com. You can also find written reviews on there and other content. You can write into the show anytime by sending us an email. Our email is cinemaholicspodcast@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support us, there's 3 ways to do it. First, you can become one of our patrons on patreon.com/cinemaholics. You can check out our merch page and get your hands on a Cinemaholics hoodie, shirt, mug, or shot glass. Or you can leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts if you are so inclined. We super appreciate anything you can do to help our show. Let's get into off topics because we have a few films we're of course going to be reviewing later in the show, included Pieces of a Woman, Sylvie's Love, and The Midnight Sky. For off topics, a few things to share. First of all, extra milestone this past week, we celebrated the film anniversaries for Brazil, which came out in 1985, and Edward Scissorhands, which came out in my birth year, 1990. Both films just celebrated a film anniversary, so Sam Noland and Will Ashton and myself talked about both films, and it was a ton of fun. Will, wouldn't you say it was probably the best extra milestone all week?
I would hope so.
Yeah, it was fun though, Will. I feel like we had some heated discussions, if I recall.
I don't think we were heated. I mean, I know I know Sam wasn't quite on the same boat as us with Brazil, but I don't think it was ever quite heated. I mean, I know we got pretty impassioned with our thoughts, that if that's what you mean, but I didn't think it was heated.
You heard it here first, folks. If you want the most impassioned discussion, it's pretty titillating review of our show. But we should mention that Extra Milestone is going to be going through some changes. First of all, it's going on a bit of a hiatus. We don't know if it's going to be coming back, but Sam Noland is stepping away from the show. We're going to miss you, Sam, but he's going to be moving on to other stuff. And from here on out, it's looking like if we do keep Extra Milestone going forward, it'll probably go back to being once a month again, and probably just one film a month. So we're still working on the details of how that would work out. If you want Extra Milestone to stay a thing, please go to the comments and let us know so that we can take that into account. Of course, we want to make sure we keep the show if enough of you folks are interested. We know you guys like Extra Milestone, but just want to make sure that we're making this choice under the best circumstances possible. All right, speaking of things coming up, top 10 movies of 2020. You heard about this at the top of the show. We do have a top 10 movies of 2020 episode coming your way, but we want the listeners to be more involved than ever. So we've been doing this thing with voicemails over the last few months. It's been a blast, and we've taken a break from the past couple of weeks, and we want to collect from you your number one movie of 2020. Now, you can both leave us a voicemail on the Swell app, or you can email us audio at cinemaholics@gmail.com, either or. But please tell us, what was your favorite movie of 2020 and why? We want to know about, like, what did this movie do for you in this year? How did it speak to you? Why did it shine above the rest? So please take to the Swell app or email us your audio clip. And I can't wait to hear some of these responses. I'm sure it's going to be a ton of fun. And Will, Abby, I should say first, are you prepared to talk about your favorite films of 2020? Or are you still working to collect your list?
I'm not prepared at all. Yeah, I got to catch up on quite a few. But I'm excited to dig into some good films. That's always one of my favorite rushes, I guess, is just catch up on all these films I've been hearing good things about and just never got around to watching. So hopefully this crunch time is going to be beneficial as opposed to not. But yeah, I'll try to catch up as many things as I can before we finally record. But for now, I'm still in catch up mode.
Yeah, same here. What about you, Abby? Have you made any progress on your films of the year yet?
I have somewhat. I've done a couple of top tens for a few different websites in the last few weeks. But I feel like that I've actually seen some movies that I've liked since then. So that list could possibly be changing. And there are a few movies like One Night in Miami that I don't think any of us are going to be able to see until like it comes out on Amazon the week after that. So I think I feel more or less prepared, but I feel like there's always kind of the asterisk of like there might be some other things that could potentially alter that a little bit.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean. Definitely want to make sure that my list is in tip-top shape, but that will probably prove to be very difficult because there's so many movies I'm scared of not including, honestly. And yeah, like Will said, this is probably my favorite like mad dash of the year as well. It's always a lot of fun. All right. Also, we of course want to go through some of the things we watched this week. We don't have time to do featured reviews for them, but we've been watching lots of different things. I'll start with Cobra Kai Season 3, which just hit Netflix on January 1st. I think of Will and Abby, I think I'm the only Cobra Kai stan. I think that's the case. But as the Cobra Kai representative on Cinemaholics, I just have to say I'm about 9 episodes into the 3rd season. And, I was talking to Charlie Ridgely about this last week. We did a live stream together, and he had seen it before I did. And he told me, if you really like the first 2 seasons of Cobra Kai, season 3 is just going to be like more of what you love. And I have to echo his observation there. I think that's 100% accurate. I love this show, and it's still as good as ever. They've taken it to some pretty, darker places, but it's still the cheesy goofball karate in the valley show that has really taken me, by surprise over the past few years. I'm so excited to see a 4th season produced by Netflix coming out after what we've seen here. Though I haven't finished it, so I actually don't know how this thing really ends and what we can expect from the, Cobra Kai world moving forward. But I have a feeling it's going to be as good as ever. Let's see. So News of the World. This is the new Paul Greengrass film with Tom Hanks. I think, Abby, you had a chance to see this one. Will and I were unable to check it out, which is why we can't review it on the show this week. But what can you tell us about it really quickly?
For sure. So this is currently in theatrical release only in the U.S. It is streaming on Netflix outside of the U.S., so it's possible that some of our listeners may actually have access to it at this point. I think the U.S. has to wait until around January 11th to see it. But yeah, this is the new Paul Greengrass, Tom Hanks Western that is based on a novel. And I really enjoyed it. It's very much a dad movie, and it kind of has dad movie energy. It's got a great score by James Newton Howard that really kind of scratches the Western itch. I personally, aside from this, had been looking for like good Western soundtracks to accompany a book that I've been reading, and this one was pretty perfect in that aspect as well. But the story is that Tom Hanks's character, Captain Kid is his name. He goes from town to town reading newspapers out loud to people so that they can kind of get caught up on what's going on outside of their own small universe. And along the way, he meets a young kind of feral girl who was kidnapped from her family by Kiowa Indians, and is now being transported back to her remaining family. But the person who was transporting her has been killed, so she's just kind of out in the woods. And he decides that he's going to try and reunite her with an aunt and uncle who live in a different part of Texas where they are. And so it kind of follows their journey to try and get to her family and the bond that they form along the way. And so there's a lot of really interesting sort of episodic adventures. The scenery and the music and the set design and the acting are all just they really kind of fit. They really kind of fit this genre and this movie really well. And I think anybody who's a fan of, like, say the Coen brothers remake of True Grit or any of the more kind of recent modern-ish westerns like 3:10 to Yuma, I think fits this too. I think it's really enjoyable. It's just a really solid kind of old school feeling of just entertainment, basically cinematic entertainment. I'm really kind of sorry that I didn't get to see this on a big screen, because it's got great panoramic views, and I think between that and the music, which also feels very large and atmospheric, I think it would make a really fun theatrical viewing experience. But obviously the recommendation is only to do that if it's safe, and it's not right now. But hopefully that'll be a thing that people can catch up with in a theatrical form at some point in the future. But until now, I guess streaming will have to do.
Yeah, I would have been at the theater watching this for sure, like prioritizing it if that was like viable. But, especially right now. Yeah, it's, it seems as worse as ever, this pandemic. And so we encourage everybody to stay home, especially if you're in the United States. And if you're in a place where cases are, a lot higher than they should be, then you definitely do not want to risk that for any movie, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. This is, stay home and stay safe. But yeah, just if you're feeling a little bit sad about the opportunities that we lost to see things in large format in the last year, I feel like this is an example of one of those things. But it's still very good to watch in any format.
Yeah, I love watching Westerns on the big screen. It's always fun, and we don't get enough of them, So hopefully, like you said, the opportunity to see films like this on the big screen will present themselves again in the near future. We can only hope. But, okay, what else do we have here? We also have We Can Be Heroes. This is the Netflix movie. I don't know much about it. I know Pedro Pascal's in it. I know it's like the sequel to Shark Boy and Lava Girl. It's kind of a goofy kids superhero thing, right? Yeah, what's the deal with this, Will? You're the one who saw this.
Yeah, so this is the second film starring Pedro Pascal that came to a major streaming service on Christmas Day that involves superheroes. Obviously, the first one being Wonder Woman 1984.
Yeah.
But this one, as you mentioned, it's, I guess, technically a sequel to The Adventures of Shark Boy and Lava Girl, but it's kind of more like in the same connective universe. Like it's obviously going for an Avengers sort of thing, but with this like Troublemaker Studios universe. I don't know. I guess the TSU technically, but it follows primarily Pedro Pascal and his daughter, who are her father is this like kind of on the out superhero who he's been crime fighting for a long time, but he's trying to kind of push that away, and his daughter is expected to have superpowers, but currently she doesn't know what they are. So that's kind of the source of concern and potential ridicule for her. But when this kind of global catastrophe happens and all the superheroes need to come together for the benefit of the world, there's this huge incident where they all get kidnapped and the kids have to come in and save the day. And it's very much a superhero movie that's geared towards like, I want to say like 8 to 10, maybe 12-year-olds, which is fine. Like, it's kind of nice to see. Ironically, it's nice to see a superhero movie that's for kids again, because, like, there's so many superhero movies now that feel like in the PG-13 R-rated mode. So it's nice to see something that's very like hard on sleeve, goofy and silly in a way that we don't see as often in a movie like this. But it's Robert Rodriguez in kid movie mode, which for me, I think that really worked well with the first Spy Kids. And then everything else has been mostly diminishing returns in that front, mainly because I think Spy Kids 1 was really good at balancing his like very low grade CG with some like practical effects and, inventive makeup and different production designs, which I think really worked out for the better. And it showed his talents for kind of like your DIY filmmaking in a fun and inventive way. I feel like everything since then in this genre has been like kind of like CG overload, where it just kind of feels like everyone's in a green screen studio and just saying lines that are projected in front of them. And there's this hokiness to them that I feel is less charming than that first film. And this movie, it's somewhere in between, I'd say, because there is a very like a plucky spirit to this film that I think makes it a little bit more appealing than some of his other recent kid films. But this one doesn't really stand out enough to where you're not just thinking of like Sky High or The Avengers or The Incredibles or all these other movies that it's clearly emulating, to the point where, it just doesn't feel like its own thing, even though it's kind of this extended universe for Rod Rodriguez's films. It just kind of feels like a, B grade version or a C grade version of these other superhero movies that we've seen mostly fairly recently. But if you are a fan of his work and you'd like this universe and you like Shark Boy and Lava Girl, I will say up front that Taylor Lautner did not come back. And whoever they had to replace him is very much a replacement in that he doesn't speak and he just basically grunts. And I don't even think he smiles. Like he just kind of is standing in the background for most of the movie. I don't know if that's in defiance of Taylor or what. Yeah. What's his name? I had it before and Taylor Lautner, that's it. I don't know if that's in defiance of that or if he just didn't really have much planned for this character anyway, and that's why Taylor Lautner didn't come back. But they're very much like glorified cameos for these other new stars. And I would say it's like a fine C type Netflix film in that, like, if you have young kids, this does have this very kind of zany appeal to it, where the superpowers of the kids are enjoyably wacky, and it is fairly inoffensive, and there's no like sense of danger or threat or like high stakes. So I think kids, especially young kids, will find this to be fairly amusing, and I think that's nice. But I think for most people, they're just going to kind of find this to be a big shrug and move on. So I think an admirable but underwhelming C is where I land, because I've mostly forgot about it, even though I saw it only like 2 days ago, and it just didn't really make much of an impact on me. But for what it is, it's fairly nice and harmless, and I'm happy that Rod Rodriguez is happy making these films still.
Yeah, I know there's another thing too, the Shadow in the Cloud. You already saw this at TIFF, but I don't remember you talking about it too much, but that's out now?
Yeah, that came to VOD, and this is the one that's, I guess, fairly controversial, because this is, I think, the last published screenplay from Max Landis, who, the director here, I forget her name off the top of my head, but she was credited as giving basically a rewrite of her own film. But from what I've heard, it's basically Max Landis's script through and through, which I'm very curious about, because for me, what I remember about this film is that the first half of it, I think, is very compelling in a contained, low or high stakes, but like low environment sort of way, where we just follow a character that's very, again, like on her wits and just trying to figure out what to do in this very stressful situation. It relies a lot on just like kind of minute details not working, and like building up stakes in a very practical and intense way. And I was really digging that part of it, particularly with Chloe Grace Moretz giving, I thought, a pretty good performance in this kind of fun but also very intense role. But as the second half comes along, without giving away anything, it removes all those stakes pretty much for something that's inherently like goofier and a lot like less less practical, kind of more special effects driven, and just like any sense of realism or plausibility is out the window at that point, which is fine if you didn't really care for the first half and you just wanted something that was a little bit goofier than what you got there. But I guess for me, what I was really digging with the first half was just kind of erased instantly with the second half in a way that feels like they just didn't really know what to do after a certain point, and they just kind of threw the sink out the window and just were like, let's just go wild and do whatever we want at this point, which, I mean, didn't really work for me. And it just makes for an underwhelming second half, in my opinion, because my investment was gone and I just found myself just not really caring at that point. But I am curious to read some more reviews to see where people land on this film, because I am curious to see where that divide is. Like, if people didn't like the first half but are really enjoying the second half, or if it's more where I stood, where it was like the first half was a little bit more interesting and the second half became disappointment. But for me, it's a high C+, just because I just didn't really care at all for that second half, and it really felt like a bummer after a pretty compelling and engaging first half. But I hope some people get something out of it. I don't think this is one you should rent for, I think $15 is what it's cost right now digitally, but if this is available at your local Redbox and you can get it for like $2 and you can just kind of try it out, I think that's the perfect way to watch this film. But otherwise, I'd say skip it.
Yeah, so I looked it up, and Roseanne Liang is the director. She I don't know her too well. So she's a Chinese New Zealand film director. She's actually the first the first Chinese New Zealander to like release a theatrical feature film.
Oh, really?
So,
wow.
Yeah, so she has that to her name. I've never seen her films, though. She made something called My Wedding and Other Secrets, I'm seeing here, and something called Banana in a Nutshell. So
I haven't seen those either. This is probably the only one I've seen, but
yeah,
I am curious to check out other work based on what I liked about the first half. But yeah, that second half just really underwhelmed me.
All right, well, that is our pop culture catch-up for this week. Lots of interesting stuff is just kind of flying at us as the holidays are kind of coming to an end here. Next week, like we've mentioned, is going to be our top 10 films of the year, and then the dreaded January month. I'm very curious how January is going to go in a pandemic environment and what kind of things we're going to be getting. We were just looking at some of the films that are coming out in January right before we started the show, and it's quite an eclectic bunch. We haven't announced this yet, but Will and I are going to be doing Sundance this year, repping Cinemaholics. And Abby, I think you said you might be doing Sundance this year, or was it South? I can't remember if that was which one.
South by Southwest is what I am currently working on getting accreditation for.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't remember which or the other. They kind of blend because their names are kind of similar. But yes, we will be covering Sundance in January, so hopefully that'll be a nice bomb on 2021, which is off to quite a start.
Did you say bomb?
Bomb, yeah, BALM
bomb
version.
Okay, yeah, bomb.
Yeah.
Okay,
sorry.
that's what I thought. It sounded like bomb, like, yeah, but I guess either way.
He's a baby. What are you giving him a bomb for?
Let's get into our first featured review this week, Pieces of a Woman.
Martha, is that you? How are you?
In 60 to 70% of these cases, we rarely find a satisfactory explanation.
There is something between us.
There's certain things medically we just don't have answers for.
To dream love.
Very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
No, I can't wake without you always.
How is Martha?
Martha's fine. She's always fine.
Have you decided to go to the trial? That's the right thing to do, honey.
Because you say it is.
She has to pay for her incompetence. We need some justice here.
No, you need.
Now, this one's going to be, I think, hitting Netflix next week, January 7th. But it has had a theatrical release, so the three of us were able to see a screener of it ahead of time. So we're going to talk about it this week since we are doing the Top 10 episode next week. So this new film was directed by Cornel Mundrusco. The screenplay is from Kata Weber. And it is a bit of a can of worms movie because, well, first of all, it stars Vanessa Kirby, Molly Parker, Sarah Snook, Eliza Schlesinger, Benny Safdie, Jimmy Fails, and Ellen Burstyn. It's a fantastic cast. Martin Scorsese is the executive producer. So what's the problem? Well, since this movie premiered at the Venice International Film Festival, which I think it got an award for Vanessa Kirby, actually, there has been some stuff coming out about one of the co-stars I didn't mention, Shia LaBeouf. So we won't get into the details of that, but basically Shia LaBeouf is facing some pretty serious allegations of domestic abuse from somebody, and I don't know if it's appropriate to mention who that person is who is leveling the accusation, but for the purposes of this movie, it is raising some concerns because this is a movie that actually sort of depicts him acting in a role that I don't want to say perfectly mirrors or anything, but it definitely resembles some of these accusations. So I will say for me watching this movie, it was hard for me to get that out of my head, right? Whether rightful or not, and I think rightfully based on what I've seen as credible evidence or credible accounts of what his behavior. I had a very difficult time sort of getting into this movie. I'm not going to lie. But setting up the film, so the premise is pretty simple. We kind of start with a very, very ambitious 30-minute long take where we see the circumstances around a home birth. And without giving anything away, something pretty tragic happens over the course of that scene, and it creates some serious tensions. Our main characters are a woman named Martha, played by Vanessa Kirby, and a man named Sean, played by Shia LaBeouf. She's a bit more she comes from a family that has, money. Shia LaBeouf is more of a working man kind of type. And over the course of the film, we see the cracks in their relationship as they both react to something that has happened to them, that they're trying to decide what action should they take. Should it be legal? Should it be something they need to resolve in their partnership? And it's a very bleak film in that regard. There are some very depressing, haunting themes at play here, and it's definitely not a film that I think normally resembles the holiday season when you're curling up on the couch with the family looking for something to watch. This is not that kind of movie, I'll say at the forefront. But just speaking to the quality of the film, Abiel Chessie, what did you think of Pieces of a Woman? Is there anything here that you think is not bleak? If you want to challenge that, or how are you feeling about it?
Oh no, it's bleak throughout. I think that the first 30 minutes of the movie, particularly the bits around the home birth sequence, are legitimately troubling, but I think in a way that is artistically ambitious and compelling and interesting. I would say that the rest of the movie after that point, for me at least, kind of becomes awards baity, kind of like, that 30 Rock joke that went on for the entire season about Tracy Jordan trying to get his EGOT by starring in a movie called Hard to Watch. That's kind of the situation that's going on here, where it's definitely not the most egregious kind of movie to hit that particular spot, but it's definitely, I think there are some parts of it that are very hard to watch, and they know they're hard to watch.
I would interject that Ellen Burstyn in particular gets a straight up Oscar bait monologue in this that feels
oh my gosh.
So you are trying so hard right now.
First of all, it's you're trying so hard, and also it comes out of nowhere. That was my issue with a lot of the stuff that happens in the rest of this movie, is that there are a lot of really big turns and really big moments that feel like they're just kind of inserted in there willy-nilly. There are some relationship betrayals that happen that were not really suggested as a possibility up to that point, that just kind of occur. There are some bits of dialogue that just feel like piles of lines with no real point. There are some elements where I think histrionics kind of get mistaken for profundity. I think folks have been watching people have been watching John Cassavetes movies and kind of taking away the wrong lessons from them. And I feel like the movie as a whole kind of hits that on the head. There are also some visual metaphors that are just extremely obvious, and obvious to the point that they just get repeated ad nauseum. So it starts off really, harrowingly, but kind of promisingly. And then it just kind of becomes self-parody after a while. Although I will say that I think Vanessa Kirby's performance throughout is pretty consistent. I think the performances in general are good. They're people making the best of what they're given to work with. I think the problem is just that what they're given to work with isn't very good.
Yeah, I have to say I agree with just like everything you just said, echoing all of it. But what about you, Will Ashton? What did you think of Pieces of a Woman? Do you think it's incomplete or the whole picture?
Well, I should note early on that I saw this back in TIFF, so admittedly, my reflection of it is a little bit murkier compared to you two who have just seen it recently. But similar to Abby, I remember thinking that the first like 30, 45 minutes of the film, including, like you said, that like 25-minute single take early on, was like when I was watching all that, I was like, this is going to be like one of my favorite movies of the year. Like, this is fantastic. I've grown a little bit weary of like single takes being used in the era of like digital technology, because there is kind of like a showiness to it that tends to get I don't know. It just feels like a little disingenuous after a point. Like some filmmakers, I think, are just doing it because they're just showing off, basically. And I felt this movie, it did use it effectively. Like I felt the single take was very good at like drawing out your suspense, kind of getting you in the moment of the characters, and the performances in those scenes were so good that it felt truly compelling in a way where I was just instantly gripped, and I was just like, where is this movie going? But yeah, I agree that after that point, it's still like, I still think the middle of it works, but I do agree that as the movie goes along, particularly as it gets to that third act, it does kind of, it falls into some heavy tropes and some kind of melodrama that unfortunately takes away from what I was really enjoying about these opening minutes. And I'm glad you brought up Cassavetes, because I was thinking of that. And it's interesting because I was thinking of this film when I watched and when we were discussing Black Bear a few weeks ago, because that's another film that is obviously borrowing from Cassavetes as well. And I think this movie kind of has some similar issues in that it recognizes what works about Cassavetes films and why there are so many that work so well. But I do agree that it just doesn't quite have the emotional sincerity to it that I think makes it as rich and as like authentically lived in as those movies too. At least, as I said, like in the third act, where it falls into like heavy melodramatic speeches and stuff like that. But I do think the beginning of the film, or at least the first half or first 2/3 of it, is very well directed, and it captures some good performances from our central cast in a way that it does feel very gripping. And like, even though it is very bleak, it can be a little one note throughout. It does strike that sense of emotional intensity that kept me engaged throughout, especially after watching a ton of films over and over again, to the point where this one I remember stood out because it had a lot of key scenes that I won't be forgetting anytime soon. But yeah, I mean, I think the main takeaway is I do agree with you, Abby, that I think Vanessa Kirby's performance is outstanding, and it's a great showcase for her, because I think she's been doing some solid work throughout, but it's often in supporting roles that just don't really showcase her full talents. Like I think back to something like Hobbs and Shaw, where like I know you like that movie, John. I'm not a fan of Hobbs and Shaw personally, but I do
also
think
The Crown. Yeah. She's kind of playing second fiddle in those first two seasons a little bit.
Okay, I haven't actually watched The Crown admittedly, but I just know she's been doing a lot of like supporting work throughout the past few years. But I'm glad she finally paid her dues and she's doing leading roles like this. And I would like to see more, because I think she does some great work in this, and I'm excited to see her get some award attention. But ultimately, yeah, I found myself having somewhat mixed feelings throughout, particularly by the end. Like I think the last scene of this is the most egregious in terms of being weirdly kind of hokey and like almost kind of like TV movie in a way that was like totally just way different than the beginning of the film. So it's a bit of a hodgepodge in terms of quality and style, but what does work, it does stick with me. And I guess I'm a little bit more positive than you are ultimately, Abby.
So I mentioned the director of this was Cornel Mandrusko, and I believe this is his first American feature film. He's a Hungarian director, and his last two have been pretty well-reviewed films, the Jupiter's Moon and White God. So this is kind of, I think, his debut into American cinema, and, featuring from mostly American actors. Vanessa Kirby, I believe, is a British actress. That said, one of the things that I felt was really squandered in this, because I agree with both of you that this is Vanessa Kirby's, movie in terms of her performance. I don't know. I don't want to put words in your both mouths, but that's kind of how I feel. That said, I feel like this film really squanders a lot of its other characters. We kind of mentioned how Ellen Burstyn gets a very strangely written scene. Molly Parker, I don't think, is in the film enough. And also, a film with Benny Safdie and Jimmy Fails, who, Benny Safdie, of course, one of the Safdie brothers, responsible for like Uncut Gems and Good Time. Benny Safdie starred in Good Time. And then Jimmy Fails from Last Black Man in San Francisco. It's great to see them in the film, but I just really felt like these were some ensemble performances that, I don't know, just really were squandered. It's like, if you're going to cast these incredible actors, I just wish they had more to do in this film, or at the very least we're at least like given more than like just a handful of scenes each. But yeah.
I also felt that with I don't know how to pronounce her name, but the comedian that's in the film that plays
Eliza Schlesinger. Yeah.
Eliza Schlesinger. Yeah. Because I remember, like, I was very surprised when I saw her in the film, and I was like, oh, like this. I didn't think it was going to be a comedic performance. So I was like, if she's in such a prominent role, like, surely she's going to do some stuff. And then she didn't really. She just kind of looks concerned, and then says some passing words here and there. But yeah, it just kind of felt like, like, what if you're gonna have such a prominent comedian in this role, like, aren't you gonna give her something to do? And they didn't really ultimately.
Right. It comes across to me as like stunt casting.
Yeah, particularly in the case of Jimmy Fails, who has like 2 scenes total, and the first thing that we see him in, he's there for like 2 seconds, and it seems like, because it's Jimmy Fails, but also the way that they shoot that character, it seems like he's somebody, like it's an introduction to somebody that we're going to see more of, and then we don't until we do, and all of a sudden it's a very different context, and that moment is never really fully led up to or explained in any way. Like, it kind of makes me wonder if, I don't know, like it seems like there are things that are left out, and I wonder if that's just like editing stuff down, if there's like cutting room floor stuff that like actually gives you a more kind of richly imagined world that these characters live in, or if it really just makes that jump and expects you to make that jump too.
Right. So it definitely sounds to me like all three of us have some pretty serious reservations about a film, even though we like certain aspects of it. It sounds like we all enjoy the filmmaking, and, particularly in the first part of the film. But I think, like with Will, what you mentioned very specifically, just the last section of this film, it's so hokey and so unearned. And I have to say, this was a real slog for me to get to. It put me in a bad mood. I just found myself really unimpressed with most of like what I was seeing. I mean, there's certain aspects that are totally fine, competent, performances are good. Howard Shore's music is good, obviously. But yeah, I think by the end of this, I was kind of, I forgot to even log it on Letterboxd because I just wanted to move on to something else so quickly. I was very disappointed in the experience overall. So my final grade is a C+, mainly for like some of these technical elements that I do think are worth watching. But it's weird because part of me wants to say, oh, like just the first 30 minutes is like, as a short film, is definitely great. But then at the same time, I'm like, is it though? Because there really is there's no arc to just the 30 minutes by themselves. So it even then it still feels a little incomplete to me. So, but what about you, Will? What's your final grade for Pieces of a Woman?
Yeah, I mean, I guess when I come in with some criticisms, it's less like me trying to attack the film, or rather me acknowledging that I like the first half of this so much that ultimately what I feel falls short is just makes it a little bit more underwhelming than I anticipated going in. But when I saw the film, I remember being back and forth on it because I do like it. I think I like it the most of the three of us, but I do agree. I think when it falls short, it's really apparent, and it just stands out in a way that undermines the experience, and it just takes away from what stands out so prominently with the greater aspects of the film. But that's not to say that I think it's a terrible film or that it completely drops the ball or anything. I just think that its shortcomings are very glaring and underwhelming to the point where it just undermines what was so impacting about the first half, at least for me. So I guess I'll give it a very low B, just because I do think there's enough in that beginning half to make me appreciate the film and appreciate the filmmaking, like you're mentioning, John. But ultimately, I just think that this could have been a much better and stronger film overall. And in the end, it just kind of feels like a hodgepodge of quality. Like there's some aspects of it that are genuinely great and very rich and vividly produced, and some aspects that are just completely corny and just don't really capture what they're trying to do aesthetically. So it's a mixed bag, but there's enough here that I value that I didn't feel it to be a wasted experience.
All right. So it sounds like Will likes this a bit more than I do. I was pretty bummed by it. What about you, Abby? Where do you land?
John, I think we're pretty much on the same page. I'm a C+ here for, yeah, like you mentioned, the technical aspects, also Vanessa Kirby's performance. Like the amount of effort here, I think, from the performers is, I mean, it's undeniable. People are working really hard with the material that they have. It just ends up being, unfortunately, kind of thankless in some parts. And I also agree with you that I'd like to see more of Molly Parker in this, because I feel like as much as the movie is about the grief of the central characters, it's just as much about a woman who probably feels awful about a horrible, tragic thing that happened on her watch. And I would be really curious to see more of that perspective. But I think in general, I feel like it's very easy to see ways in which this movie could be better. It's easy to see kind of the movie at the core of this that could have been. I think what we get has some interesting potential, but ultimately it just feels like maybe the simplest path in pretty much every aspect is taken. So yeah, C+ from me.
All right. Pieces of a Woman is going to be available on Netflix, like we mentioned, on January 7th. It is just a little over 2 hours long, and based on what I'm seeing from Rotten Tomatoes, it looks like most critics are about where Will is. It has a 76% on Rotten Tomatoes out of 72 votes counted, and its average rating is actually kind of high for that. It's a 7 out of 10, which for Rotten Tomatoes is not bad, actually. I think similar to what you were saying, Well, I think people are responding to that opening act being as good as it is, and then maybe some people are connecting with the ending a little bit more, and that's kind of where the critical community is at. But of course, as always, let us know in the comments on cinemaholics.com what you think of the film. If you have a chance to catch it, you decide that it maybe you want to see it for yourself, let us know what you think. Let's move on to a film that is completely different in terms of style and in terms of just everything, honestly. Sylvie's Love. This is the latest film from Eugene Ash. I think it's his second film, if I'm not mistaken. And this one is a throwback period film starring Tessa Thompson, Nnamdi Asomugha, Ryan Michelle Bath, Regé Jean-Page, Eva Longoria. It's quite the cast. This one premiered at Sundance back last January. And so it's been a year since I have seen it. And I have to say, I remember so much of this film. I'm not going to talk too much about it since it has been a year, but I do remember a lot of the details. I have plenty of things that I want to mention. That said, I have talked about this film a couple times on the show. So I'll let you, Will, and you, Abby, take up the majority of this conversation. So starting with you, Abby, how would you summarize Sylvie's Love? What's like the premise of this one?
So Sylvie's Love kind of takes place in mid-century Harlem and also Detroit. I'd say mid-century. It's really more like throughout the 60s, early 60s and later 60s. And Sylvie, who's played by Tessa Thompson, is kind of a young woman who is engaged to a guy who's fighting in the Korean War when the movie starts, and is working at her dad's record store. And she is she while she's working there meets Robert, who is John, you're going to have to remind me how we pronounce the leading actor's name in this one. It's a toughie.
I'll try. It's tough. Yeah, Nnamdi Asomugha is how I say it. I don't think that
Nnamdi
is
Asomugha.
100%.
That sounds right.
Apologies as always.
Because he's great. Yeah, there are a lot of great performances in this.
Is the main producer too, I believe. If I'm not
mistaken. Oh, great!
He's a former NFL player as well, and this is quite a breakout role for him.
No kidding. Yeah, it's a great breakout role for him. So Robert is a jazz musician. He's part of a jazz quartet that is just kind of starting to get noticed by people who can help them kind of have a really big career. They're about to they're noticed by a patron who kind of becomes their manager, played by Jemima Kirk, and she wants them to tour in Paris. And at the same time, Robert and Sylvie's relationship is kind of evolving. Sylvie has reservations just because she's not sure that it would be great for her to mess things up with her fiance because he's overseas, and also his kind of station in life guarantees her a more stable married life than life with Robert would. So they kind of have a short romance over the course of the summer, and then he leaves, and they are reunited 5 years later, at which point Sylvie has become a TV producer, which is kind of her dream job, and is having some stress related to that with her husband, Lacey, who is not super happy about the fact that his wife's ambitions are kind of eclipsing her duties at home. And she runs into Robert outside of a concert hall, and they kind of pick up where they left off. And there are also some questions about the future of Robert's career because of changing musical tastes. Jazz isn't such a hot item anymore, and so he's trying to figure out how he can continue his musical career, and Sylvie is trying to figure out also how she can advance in the career that she is just starting to get into and really finding that she loves.
Wonderful movie to pair with Soul in that regard. Now that I think about it.
That's a good point. Yeah, absolutely. I did think about that a couple times while watching it.
Maybe La La Land. We'll see. But okay, Will Ashton, what did you think of Sylvie's Love? Did it sweep you off your feet?
Well, first, you mentioned that he made another film. Yeah, he made Homecoming in 2012. So this is, I guess, was it now like 8 or 9 years since his last film? So quite a long break between films. But I'm talking about Eugene Nash, the director. But
right.
Yeah, I weirdly enough, not to spoil anything, but I guess I have a running theme in this episode in that for like the first half or so, I was like fully bewitched by this movie. Like you said, it's like a very old fashioned sort of romance. It has an earnestness and a sincerity to it that I found pretty disarming and ultimately endearing in that there's nothing like ironic about the time period being used here or like the genre that's tapping into. It feels like a very warm glove kind of movie where it doesn't approach this material with any sort of like distance or like cutesiness. Like I think, well, cutesiness to an extent, but like nothing like insincere in that approach, and that it definitely just feels like a movie that's trying to evoke this time, but in a genuine sort of emotionally earnest sort of way. And our two central castmates here do have a kind of warm, understated sort of chemistry that is quick to like and easy to invest in, particularly with Tessa Thompson providing another star presence type performance, because she's recently been in a few films that just kind of feel like they're undermining her talents, like Men in Black International and that Lady and the Tramp movie that came out that everyone forgot about, and a few other things where it just kind of feels like Hollywood wasn't quite sure what to do with her anymore, and that was a shame. So I'm glad this movie comes along to actually showcase her talents, like I said, her clear star power, because it's very apparent in a number of her other films, and it's nice to see that recognized here. But I guess for me, something about the third act, and I'm kind of hoping to discuss it because I'm trying to figure out what exactly it was, but something about the third act kind of feels messy in a way that's, I guess, supposed to be deliberate for the characters, but also kind of feels like story-wise, it's trying to do too many things at the same time, and the point where I just don't think it quite stuck the landing for me in a way that it did so well with the first half. Maybe it's just because I was really taken by the simple sincerity of the first half that maybe the more kind of emotional turmoil of the second half wasn't quite to my liking, but I do appreciate the movie for having a maturity and a adult sense perspective that is really refreshing, especially, I mean, compared to something like Pieces of a Woman that is so like emotionally fraught and like, you know, higher wired. Yeah, this is a definitely a much more casual, calming sort of film, but at the same time, like I do think, like you mentioned, Abby, like there's a whole subplot with like fiance that I feel like is just kind of randomly dropped, and I wasn't quite sure what to make of that. And there's a few other things I won't spoil in the second half that kind of do similar things where story plots are introduced and they're just kind of like talked off camera or just kind of like alluded to and then just kind of forgotten about or just kind of like resolved fairly quickly in a way that, I don't know, I guess that might make it a little bit more authentic to some viewers, but I guess it just kind of struck me as a bit haphazard from a screenplay standpoint. But I do think what works here really does work. For instance, the production design and the period design of the film is just immaculate. Like, I think a lot of the period pieces that went into like the costuming and the like automobiles and the buildings, I don't know if that's primarily CG or if they had to like build these sets, but it all looks great. And I do think they do a great job of evoking this time in a very beautifully cinematic way. Especially when I was watching the opening, I was just like, man, you know, yet again, what another film to like not see in theaters. I know I guess I envy you for that, John, because you had a chance to see it at Sundance, but there's so much about this film that looks great, and it's clearly, you know, reminiscing a bunch of other romantic films. But ultimately, I do like the film a good bit. I can see why you were so taken by it, John, but something about the end just didn't quite hit as hard for me as the rest of it, unfortunately.
Yeah, if we can be specific too, you know, the films that this seems to be invoking the most are the Douglas Sirk films of the 1950s. So if you've seen any of those, listeners, like it definitely reminded me of films like All That Heaven Allows and Imitation of Life, Written on the Wind. These films that are very melodramatic, and you know, I think that's why, like, you know, it shouldn't be a surprise. Like, it's definitely up for debate, I suppose. Like, this film's more melodramatic turns toward the end, like Will's referencing. All of that is certainly like trying to be true to the era, like Will's saying here. But yeah, I guess like mileage will vary on like how you'll take that in. But yeah, agreed. When we're setting up this romance and we're sort of getting into these characters' lives, it is just like, it's so beautiful to see. I am very, very lucky and privileged that I was able to see this on a big screen because it was immaculate in that context. And yeah, I have to definitely agree that like, I think this film's like commitment to its storytelling is so great because it doesn't just do it through the performances. It's also like the music is so true to what these characters are feeling. The score is by Fabrice Lecomte. And, you know, it's a testament to Thompson and Asumuga, who you know, their performances are so good that they don't get overshadowed by a lot of this production design. They don't get lost in it. You just always feel like these two are the point. And yeah, all of it, I think, syncs up really, really well. I have to say, I think like when I'm remembering this film, I'll have to admit the stuff that really sticks out to me really is in like the first half, and then the second half. You know, it's I don't think it's bad or anything, but it does sort of lose me in some respects. But what about you, Abby? How do you think this one ultimately works out, and what were some of your takeaways?
Yeah, I think I am in sort of a similar place as Will, although I did really enjoy the movie too. And John, I appreciate you saying that there's kind of a Douglas Sirk connection there, because I feel like that does kind of put it into a different kind of context that I can appreciate a little bit more. Because I would agree that there's kind of a third act drama separation thing that feels a little contrived, but it works out. It ends up working out. I think most of the kinks that this movie presents, I think, end up working out pretty well. The ensemble cast is really great. You can tell that everybody is super enthusiastic and really, really wants to be part of it. I think the two main performances are kind of luminous and lovely. The supporting performances are really fun too. I'd like to point out Wendy McClendon-Covey as she's sort of a TV cooking presenter that Tessa Thompson's character Sylvie works with, who is just a real hoot and kind of adds a lot of color to the proceedings. And also Regé Jean Page, who I think a lot of other people who, like me, have been binging Bridgerton will know him as the romantic lead of that show, and it's a very different performance from what he gives here. So like that role is way more stoic, obviously like a little more kind of brooding, and in this movie he's just like super lively and all over the place. So like for that reason alone, I think it's really fun to check that out. And yeah, I think across the board we're seeing a lot of really interesting and committed performances, and the set design and the time period decoration are like they're spot on. Everything looks gorgeous. And yeah, it's sort of a calming and pleasant and nicely mature movie to watch. It's really nice to watch a movie that just kind of knows what it is and wants to be the best version of that thing and ends up just being really competently made.
Yeah, I agree with basically everything there. I mean, it's just the performances like that you mentioned there too. You know, we didn't even get into like really like Ed Weeks and Jemima Kirk and Ron Funches. I mean, there's a lot of fun like standout performances here that trickle in, and I do appreciate this film though always comes back to the central couple, and like we don't feel like their story is being encroached upon or anything. So yeah, it sounds like we all enjoyed this a good bit. I probably enjoyed it the most, honestly. And I'll say that it's probably because I had such an experience with it, and in the context of how I saw it, the festival high was totally a thing. Two of the films that I was thinking of the most with this film, there are two films that I think are better than this one, only slightly. I would say like Carol. I definitely was thinking of Todd Haynes' film, and just like the romance and the period details of that one, also taking place in the 1950s. And then similarly, If Beale Street Could Talk, another film, that one from Barry Jenkins, that just I think what those two films had a little bit more in their favor was a bit more originality in the storytelling. Like they had very creative concepts, and of course, like as adaptions go, like there's part of that going for them, but. Yeah, at the same time, I think my main criticism of this film, what really keeps it from being one of my absolute favorites of the year, is just to echo, I think what you both have sort of mentioned there, is that some of the character choices, they do feel a little bit manufactured. It feels like we're just trying to make the film longer, like we're trying to extend the runtime just for the sake of it, and not necessarily like the story itself feeling very organic to the characters. I think that is certainly a criticism that I have to ring in there. But I definitely will still champion this film. I'm a huge fan, so I'm a B+ on Sylvie's Love. It's it's about like my top 30, top 25, 2020, and very very happy it is, because it brought me a lot of joy last January, to be totally honest. And I am geared to watch it again as. I definitely was feeling like if I had had time, I would have rewatched it right after Pieces of a Woman, just to, put myself back into a good mood. But alas, I did not have the time to do so. But okay, Will Ashton, what is your final grade for Sylvie's Love?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate what you got out of the film, and I think I'm not too far from it in terms of valuing everything that it does well, and appreciating this movie for existing, and appreciating it in a way that, like I said before, it's very sincere in its approach. It's doing something that's intentionally very nostalgic, but in a way that is very wholehearted and also fairly progressive, and it does feel like a nice little warm sweater of a film, especially during this winter time. But I just think there's something about the second half where it removes the simplicity and the straightforwardness of the opening for a busier storyline where different characters are introduced, and I just don't think they fully connect the story. For instance, like Eva Longoria plays a pretty sizable part during the second half of the film, and I'm still not exactly sure why.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I don't know, like why exactly. Like, because it's a she's like the third biggest star in the film, probably arguably the second biggest, and I still don't quite know why they cast her in that part. Like, it feels like maybe there was something there that got cut, or there was something that wasn't quite added to the film. But
that's my guess. Yeah, I think that they had to edit it out or something, because it does feel very stunted.
Yeah, and I just feel like that there's stuff about the third act where it just feels like a lot of stuff was just like kind of condensed, or like they wanted to introduce different ideas and talk about different aspects of race and pop culture that are interesting. I think they're topics worth discussing, but I just don't think the film has enough time to really flesh them out in a way that just kind of undermines what was admirable about that first half, and the way it was able to be fairly reflexive and simple, and without being cluttered in that particular way. But like we were saying before, like there's a maturity and a nuance to the characters and the storytelling here that is really admirable. It's just nice to see a fairly adult romance too, in a way that we don't see a movie like of this scale much anymore. Not only for it being like an old Hollywood type film, but the fact that just studios aren't really making movies like this as much anymore. It just, it's a lot more like superhero stuff. So it's nice to see a film like this of this scale and made with prominent stars, and in that respect, it's obviously quite admirable. But for me, in classic Will Ashton mode, I'm between a low B and a high B minus. I think at the moment I'm going to give it a very high B minus, just because the third act did ultimately underwhelm me in a way that that made me wish it was a little bit stronger, a little bit cleaner in its approach. But as it is, I do think this is one worth recommending. It's one of the highest B minuses I could give this year. But alas, I don't think I'm quite on your level, John, but I'm not too far from it.
All right. And what about you, Abby?
Yeah, I think I'm a solid high B, low B plus on this. I agree with Will. It's really nice to see just a movie that's kind of mature and thoughtful and like melodramatic, but not over the top melodramatic, like enjoyably romantically so. And I think the ensemble performances are really fun and interesting. I agree that there are other movies that kind of deal with this period and some of these themes in a way that are a little more artistically original and compelling, but this is still really good and I think absolutely worth checking out. It's definitely kind of one of those things that I'm kind of glad that it exists on streaming, because like when there are kind of few and far between choices, I feel like this is one of the stronger ones that you can make. So it's nice that it's widely available and available like at this time of the year, which I think is a good time to watch it.
Yeah, totally agree. So before we move on, I don't know if we mentioned it by name, but Declan Quinn did do the cinematography, and kind of interesting because he did also did Hamilton, the stage production that was filmed. And I was kind of taking a peek at some of his other films, because the only other one I could remember was like, oh yeah, that's the guy who did, I think, like Ricky and the Flash or something. He also did Hot Tub Time Machine 2, Otherhood, The Shack, and just we could go down the list. He is a cinematographer who has done every type of movie, like 28 Days, not 28 Days Later. That would be pretty funny though. And Rachel Getting Married, and it's just quite an interesting career this cinematographer had. But I will say the cinematography for me really stood out in this. Just the throwback quality they were able to add. Also mentioned because Will, you said something about Tessa Thompson's work and some of the projects she's been chosen for lately, specifically Men in Black International and Lady and the Tramp. The only other film I know about that she has made that she's in, Passing, which is in post-production, I believe. This is the Rebecca Hall film.
Rebecca Hall, yeah, that's going to be at Sundance.
Yeah, so we'll have a chance to see that actually in about a month, possibly. Yeah, maybe. So it's on my radar for sure. And hopefully that'll change our impression of Tessa Thompson's career moving forward, at least yours, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I love Rebecca Hall. I think she's a fantastic actress, and I would be very excited to see what she does behind the camera. I just didn't want to say for certain because I just don't know what I'm going to have access to at Sundance. But if I can, I'd love to see that one.
Yeah, definitely on both our radars. Sylvie's Love is available to watch on Amazon Prime right now, so you can check it out. And it's just about 114 minutes long, so a little less than 2 hours. And it has really good reviews, 92% on Rotten Tomatoes out of 90 reviews, with a pretty high average rating of 7.2 out of 10. All right, let's move on to our final film for the week, The Midnight Sky. Will and Abby saw this one. It premiered on Netflix around, I think, Christmas Day or close to it, if I recall. I know it got a release date earlier on December 11th, I think, to some select theaters. But it's available on Netflix right now. I haven't had a chance to check it out. I do know that it's based on a novel from 2016 called Good Morning Midnight, which is by Lily Brooks Dalton. And also it was directed by George Clooney, who also stars in the film along with Felicity Jones, David Oyelowo, and Tiffany Boone, and plenty others. Will Ashton, what is the premise for The Midnight Sky?
So we, as you mentioned, we follow primarily George Clooney's character, who is Augustine Lofthouse, who is an ambitious scientist who he's living in some uncertain future. I believe it's like 2050 or something like that. And things are just not going well. The planet is not really habitable much anymore. And, basically, we're on the outs, and, he is part of this crew that is getting ready to leave, as part of the small bit, the Earth's or humanity's population that is left. But, he is not, doing well. He's facing some serious illness. I don't think they specify what it is, but basically he just chooses to stay in his Arctic compound rather than basically hold up the small habit of humanity that is foraging elsewhere. And as he is, in his lonesome, just kind of trying to make peace with his last remaining days, he discovers that in his little Arctic compound there is a young girl, like a 8 or 9-year-old girl who has been left behind. And as he tries to reach out for anyone for a connection, he is unable to do so. So basically, he has to figure out a way to get her to safety, particularly with the climate of the Arctic being what it is. But as this plot is going on, there's like a separate B plot with Felicity Jones, where she is on the spaceship with David Oyelowo and Kyle Chandler and Demain Bashir and a few other actors. And basically, they're on a mission. They've been on a mission for quite a few years. And I believe they're close to getting to home or to Earth again, but some complications arise, and there's some dramatic instances that ensue from there. And yeah, that's the plot of the film.
It sounds very confusing, but I guess to me, because without a lot of context. All right, Abby, what did you think of The Midnight Sky? Is it worth staying up for?
I'm kind of meh on this one. So like the group that's returning to Earth, they have been kind of trying to find this planet that could potentially host human life. Basically, they're looking for a place to colonize, and so they've been running tests on it and are returning to Earth. But something has happened on Earth that would make it really difficult for them to come back and pretty inadvisable, which is what George Clooney is trying to communicate to them. Like, you maybe have to like not come back because things are really bad. We don't really know what the situation is though, because it's never fully explained. Which I'm not like unhappy about. I get that it's possible to have some kind of subtle disaster going on in the background and you don't have to explain every single thing. But I think the issue for me is that the two stories, while they do end up intertwining in an interesting way that kind of brings it all together at the end, they individually, those particular plots feel so self-contained that smashing them together in a situation like this really kind of takes the requisite attention away from each one of them. So the problem is that you end up feeling kind of disconnected and not sure where to focus the majority of your attention. I think there's sort of a tie at the end that feels kind of literary and interesting. I'm not really sure that reveal is really worth all the work it takes to get to that point. For a lot of the runtime, it just kind of feels like we're spinning our wheels between those two plots. Like something will kind of happen to advance it, but in terms of like actually establishing contact, like having action that actually moves the characters in the plot forward, it really takes a while to get to the point where stuff starts to happen. So for that reason, I feel like it kind of dragged. It wasn't something that I found easy to fully engage with, particularly given its runtime, which is on the longer end.
Do you agree with that, Will Ashton? You know, that's kind of what I'm seeing kind of from the reviews here, which maybe I'll like mention a couple, but yeah, does that click in with you?
Somewhat, yeah. I mean, I guess I'm slightly more positive, but not too much more positive than that. In that, I don't know what it says about me these past few weeks, but the beginning of the film, I was kind of with it. Like I was enjoying
again.
I mean, like, to be fair, I saw Piece of Woman in September, so it's not like this has been like a recurring trend. But I mean, yeah, this is a film where I appreciate the reserved, like the melancholy, understated approach to the beginning of the film, where it's very patient, it's subdued. It just allows George Clooney to kind of take a contemplative tone and pace throughout. And I was really admiring that for the first half, particularly because we see so many sci-fi films now that are obviously kind of going for the whiz bang buck and, making the most of their high budgets and explosions and all this stuff. And I appreciated that the first half of this movie was so willing to be, mature and downbeat and just kind of following a hard to read guy who, is in this kind of mournful place in his life. And I can understand that's not something that some people are going to want, especially around Christmas. But I appreciated the movie for taking that tone at the beginning of the film. But I do agree with Abby. Like, I think the decision to incorporate like kind of two different stories at the same time, like, I didn't read the books. I don't know how they flow together in the pages, but as they're presented in the film, it just kind of feels a little bit haphazard from an editing standpoint, in that we just follow one story for a long time, and then we follow the other story for a long time, and it doesn't really have a good rhythm between the two, like to the point where it's like we'd be following one story and then we go back to like the George Clooney thing. It's like, oh yeah, here's George Clooney and his little environment, and then we go back to Felicity Jones and all of her space friends, and it's like, oh yeah, there's this thing going on. And yeah, I didn't really find myself connecting to the Jones subplot as much as the George Clooney storyline. I think that was a little bit more resonant, and I think George Clooney just ultimately had more of a personal stake in that storyline. It just kind of felt like the other one was a little bit substandard in comparison. But yeah, I mean, I think like this is the biggest film that George Clooney has directed. It's like $100 million production, and I do think it's competently well directed for the most part. There's a couple scenes in this, particularly like a dream sequence involving Felicity Jones, where it's like almost borderline Sci-Fi Channel level bad, involving some like very like apparent green screen that just doesn't, that scene could have used a second pass. But the rest of the film, and if you like, there's a couple other scenes, but like the movie for the most part is able to be pretty well made, and it does show that George Clooney can hold his own as a filmmaker. But I agree with Abby that the end of the film is just so predictable in terms of its twists. Like, you can, even someone like me who's not the best at predicting end twists, I in the first like 5 minutes or so, or I guess closer to 10, it was just like, this is going to be blank and blank, and sure enough, it was blank and blank. And it just
spoilers.
Yeah,
I didn't know blank and blank did it.
Yeah, I know, it's quite a shock, I'm sure. But yeah, it was I don't know, it just felt like they were trying to like build up to something that was like more shocking or like unexpected, I guess, and it just felt like this is such an obvious way to end it that I wish they didn't present as a twist. Like, I kind of wish they were just open about what the movie was and just kind of let that inform the dramatic tension, particularly in a way that would, I think, benefit the second story and explain why it's a part of this film. But as it is, like, it is another film that is very earnest its approach. I don't think George Clooney just did this for the money. Like, I think he's at a point now where he just makes movies when he wants to. So I think he connected to the story in a very personal and honest way, and I think he really wanted to say something with this material. But it's hard not to think of other space films when you're watching this. Like, there's a lot of Martian in this, there's a lot of Gravity in this, there's a lot of Ad Astra in this for sure, and certainly a lot of Interstellar. And it just hard not to think of those films when you're watching, especially when you're watching a huge space movie like this on Netflix at home as opposed to on the big screen. So it's okay, I guess. That's where I land on it.
Yeah, I'm in kind of a similar boat to Will here. I feel like actually the movie that I was thinking about the most in regards to this was Moon, the Duncan Jones movie, which kind of deals with like kind of space exploration and isolation on kind of a profound level. But also what makes that movie so good is that it's so contained. And I feel like perhaps that is something that this movie could have benefited a bit more from. But as it is, I feel like relationships that need to be developed in certain ways because they're so spaced out don't get the chance to really develop the ways that they could.
No pun intended.
And the
right.
And the Clooney plot, I feel like is really promising and interesting, but yeah, again, doesn't really get the chance to kind of really be as introspective, I think, as it could be.
So I looked up some reviews, just to kind of see what's the word, what's the gossip, the hot goss on Midnight Sky, and so I'm seeing here like Alonso Duralde from The Wrap really was not into it. So there's a lot that's frustrating about The Midnight Sky. So it has egregious burrowing from any number of better movies to its pacing issues. But he does say that thanks to a few grace notes, its shortcomings are mostly forgivable. And I also saw Brian Tallarico from Roger Ebert said this movie is as weightless as space. He just says like the heart of this movie just isn't there. What do you think of those criticisms, Abby? Do you agree, disagree, in between?
Yeah, and I can go ahead and get into my final grade here too. I think I more or less agree with Alonso Duralde and Brian Tallarico that there's a desire to have there. I think that there's definitely a passion on Clooney's part, like Will said. I think there's definitely like competent filmmaking here and an effort being put forward. I think that the end result just structurally doesn't really doesn't really hold together the way that it should. And the attempts to kind of bring it together at the end, like almost make it work, maybe, but I think ultimately are not really worth the effort that it takes to get to that point, which is a real bummer because I think there is some potential here. And I think some of the visuals on the spaceship particularly I quite like. So like there are some things that are likable about it. But all of that together, I would say this is probably a B- for me. There's some good like craft here, but from a storytelling perspective, I feel like it really doesn't kind of have the compelling core that it needs.
All right, so that's a B- from Abby. Will Ashton, tell us about your A+. Very exciting.
I thought we were done with this joke. I guess it's a new year. We can.
New year, old tricks.
Yeah, new 100 batch of episodes. Why not? Yeah, I'm not too far from where Abby is. I guess to echo a different criticism that we made during Pieces of a Woman. I felt like there's a better film in here that wasn't fully able to come out, and I don't think that's because George Clooney wasn't trying. Like, I think we make it clear that I think his heart was in it, and I don't agree with the opinion that the film is like insincere, like that it has like a weightless quality to it. I think he wanted to do something very resonant and personal to his own life with this story. I just don't think, like Abby was saying, that is able to connect quite as well as he wanted it to. But there's like we were saying, like there's a couple grace notes. There's a lot to value in this film that to where like I don't think it's the type of film that I want to like sit around and criticize or poke holes through. Like there's enough to value and appreciate here that I think George Clooney made an admirable so-so film. Like he did a decent enough job making an okay movie, and like that's not the worst thing to have as a Netflix exclusive. But at the same time, he shot this on 65 millimeter. It does look nice, so it is a shame to not see this on the big screen, even though I wasn't particularly fond of the film altogether. But that's not to say I was like terribly unimpressed or disinterested in it. I was mostly along with it until, like Abby was saying, the end of the film, where it just didn't hit that final note quite well enough, and ultimately my engagement with it flooded after a while to the point where I'll give it a high but good-natured C+.
Well, that is The Midnight Sky. You can watch it on Netflix right now. It another film that's like just under 2 hours. And I have to admit, I contemplated seeing this one, but I got the Cobra Kai allure was far too strong, and that is kind of where my attention span went. But it sounds like it's not a total loss or anything. It sounds like there's some good stuff here.
Yeah, I think you made the right choice overall.
No, I don't know if I mentioned this on the show, but when I was watching The Prom a few weeks ago, for some reason my Netflix was like malfunctioning. It kept trying to put Queen's Gambit on while I was watching the movie.
Hell yeah.
And I don't know what that was about, but I imagine something similar happened with you and Cobra Kai, where you went to go press Midnight Sky and it just kept playing Cobra Kai instead.
Yeah.
You're just like,
it's a sign, man.
You were just like, well,
absolutely.
If I'm here,
just give in.
Yeah, I mean, that didn't need to happen because clearly here we are. But if it had, that would have just been, cemented even further. But all right, that's it for our reviews this week. But let's talk about some things that we can plug before we say goodbye. Starting with you, Abby, what's going on? What do we got to check out this week from the Abby Olczewski-verse?
That's a good question. Things have been a little bit slow in the last week or so, but I will have a full review of Pieces of a Woman up later this week on Crooked Marquee, so you can keep an eye out for that. But yeah, apart from that, I had a lovely week off last week. I posted a bunch of cat pictures, so if you follow me on Twitter at Abby Olczewski, you will probably see a bunch of those at the moment.
Abby, I don't see this lately, but your Twitter game lately has been, you leveled up. I'm just going to put it that way. It was already great, but I'm a bigger fan than ever.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I hope my cats had something to do with that. I hope it wasn't that entirely, because I'm starting to become like Kristen Wiig level cat lady over here. That's what pandemic has done to me. So I apologize.
Kristen
if
Wiig
there's
level cat lady. I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, Will Ashton, what's going on with you lately? How are you doing? Is there anything you want to share? What's up?
Yeah, I mean, I've just been here, not been working too much, so I'll just promote as I did last week, the season 4 finale of Ain't Ogre Till It's Ogre are my podcasts I do once a month with my buddies Matt Serafini and Chris Sheridan.
Love those guys.
We put together our shabby little season 4 finale around Christmas, and it's available to listen to now. So I would feel very heartened, and I would be very happy if people were willing to check that one out, especially if they haven't kept up with this season. But we're putting together our 5th season right now, and I don't know if I can say what we're doing, but I'm very excited to start the new year with what will probably be one of our zanier options. So I'm excited for that.
I was hoping you would mention your 6-minute video seconds. Second from every day of 2020.
Oh yeah, I forgot about. Yeah, I can mention that. I guess if you follow me on, I guess Instagram, or if you're friends with me on Facebook, I throughout this past year, 2020, I took 1 second of video every day, and I posted the video of what that entailed. Obviously, 2020 didn't turn out the way I intended it to, or I thought it was going to at least. So it became a less interesting video than I would have hoped. But if you are curious to know what my life is like for a year, you can go check that out on my social media feeds.
It was like genuinely surreal watching like 2020 for you like slowly get taken over by like current events. It was something else. It was like a slow motion, awfulness. Not in terms of the video. The video was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed watching it, and I show up in it a couple times.
Yeah, you make a cameo. Yeah, at least 1 or 2. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Abby, you didn't make the cut.
Yeah, I was gonna say, sorry, Abby, you didn't make the cut. I'm sorry.
It's only because I always have my webcam on, and Will apparently was spying on me. But
that's not weird at all.
Yeah, only slightly. For me, I'm still doing a lot of live streaming, and live streaming has been going super well. So I've been doing them primarily on my YouTube channel, John in Theory, which has been dormant for a couple of years. But I brought it back, and so far it's been going super well. I get on live stream almost every single day. I'll probably be getting on tonight, actually. And it's a lot of fun. It's basically me talking about all kinds of things. Mainly this past week, I've been talking about the new Pixar movie Soul. I've been going like deep on a lot of Soul stuff, but I also talk about like personal projects. I talk about critical reactions to things, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of John for sure. So if you don't come to this podcast for me necessarily, then you might not get the most out of it. But if you enjoy what I have to say, it might be worth your time. So I'll link to that in the show notes and everything. But yeah, the YouTube channel is called John in Theory.
Yeah, I appreciated your. I did get a chance to check out your stream for your update on the Pixar Theory book, so I was excited to hear about that and what was going on there. But yeah, I've been excited to check out the other ones, but I haven't had a chance. But I would recommend that one, having had seen it. So yeah.
Thanks, Will. Thanks. And yeah, one of the favorite things I did like I mentioned this in this show earlier, but I had Charlie on, and he and I did a live stream talking about our favorite pop culture from 2020. So not just movies. We did talk a lot about movies. We actually looked at like my rankings for like the whole year, and he kind of weighed in on his favorite films of the year. But we also talked about books. We talked about video games, music, manga, like you name it. We talked about comics. I mean, we just went all over the place, and it was fun because we had a live chat, so we were able to interact with people, and like they were able to ask us questions in real time, which that's probably my favorite thing about doing the whole stream thing. So yeah, definitely check that out if you're interested. It's a fun experiment, and I'm still kind of figuring it out as I go along. But so far so good. And with that, let's call it for this week. Next week is going to be our big episode, so hope you all can join us. Thank you as always for listening. And from the Internet California, I am John Negroni.
From the Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Will Ashton.
From the Internet Kansas City, I'm Abby Olchesi.
See you next time.